everybody. Welcome to VGWA World. I'm Cobretti.
And I'm Wally.
And come join us today for this special edition of Wrestle Rank, where we're going to look at all the console wrestling video games released in the 80s, from worst to best.
Before you get to this wonderful list that we put together, why not hit that like and subscribe button?
And that way, you'll get notified of all our videos featuring wrestling video game content.
Before we get started, let's go over the criteria of this worst to best list that we put together.
You might notice that we are missing PC and PC console hybrid video games. Consoles, such as the Commodore 64, the MSX, and the Amiga.
Because we're playing all these games on original hardware, and we've purchased every single one of these games that you see.
With video games venturing off into a collector's market,
price charting is crap.
It is causing gamers missing out on owning some of these awesome wrestling video games and having to resort to emulation and ROMs.
So we can give you the lowdown on if these games are worth the money.
But with any luck, we'll go through with Wrestle Rank Season 2 and return to some of these forgotten video games. Or we'll just do a whole nother series where emulation is okay.
Money growing on trees? Nope, not happening. Winning the lottery? Not happening. Buying Sergeant Slaughter's Mat Wars on the Commodore 64? No, that isn't going to happen either. Because we aren't going to spend $164 on a game. That's why we bought all the games that we could that were within a decent price. Now, if we can be monetized by you too, we guarantee to make this a tax write-off and buy all the wrestling video games to keep us in the poorhouse where we started.
Some of these video games are so rare that they have not been for sale for over a year. So here is a quick list of the video games we were not able to cover.
But for now, we're sticking to all the mainstream content.
But before we get this list started, let's look at our non-wrestling wrestling games that didn't make this list.
And I've played them and wasted my time. I hate you, Cobretti. Though you may be fooled to thinking that these are actually wrestling games, they do feature wrestlers, but they are not wrestling games.
And rounding out at the absolute bottom of this list is Tatakai Ramen Man for the Famicom. With Ramen Man not technically being a wrestler, and this video game not even featuring one wrestling maneuver, it belongs at the absolute bottom of this list.
Point and click your mouse away from this game.
And next up on our list is another video game from the Kinnikuman universe, Kinnikuman for the Famicom Disk System.
Another one Cobretti tricked me into playing.
Kinnikuman, being a wrestling anime, don't let this fool you. This game plays more like Kung Fu, with a wrestling match at the end of the level.
If Kung Fu played like crap. The new type on the Famicom, featuring Riki Choshu.
You might recognize this game as Adventures of Dino Riki, released for the NES in the US.
Don't let this game fool you. You're not wrestling. You're rock throwing, boomerang slinging, speed boot wearing, diamond collecting, woo! Fire breathing, dinosaur hunting, angel flying, son of a gun.
Well, we have to start somewhere. And there's no better place to start than with Title Match Pro Wrestling for the Atari 2600.
What do you mean that's the best place to start? That's like starting your road trip in hell.
Released in 1987, the Atari 2600's best days were far behind it.
If any video game deserves to be in a landfill, it's this game. Look at the graphics, listen to the audio, play with the controls, and dump it into a landfill.
Quite literally, hot trash. So here at VGWA World, we give this game a do not buy recommendation.
The only good thing about this game, it's the only wrestling game on the Atari 2600. And it's the only game that can make Champion Pro Wrestling look good.
Champion Pro Wrestling, released for the Sega SG-1000 in 1985.
Oh, great. Now we've moved from the 7th level of hell to the 6th.
This wrestling game, cobbled together from parts of a boxing game, was a truly atrocious game to play.
But we got to see Doc Lewis from Punch-Out!
Given the technical limitations of the SG-1000, you can at least say that they tried to release a wrestling game.
Well, Cobretti, try is an important word, because this is the first console wrestling video game, and Sega didn't try at all.
Because it was the best console-released wrestling video game of its time.
Well, yeah, you could be the best wrestling video game of the time when you have no competition. VGWA World's recommendation on if you should be buying this game is a big fat no. Spend your money on something better.
Moving on to our next game, WWF WrestleMania, released for the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1989. Bigger, better, badder. This game lied to you 3 times in a row.
You know, with the boom of wrestling in the 80s, you would have think WWF would have released a really good wrestling game. They did not. They failed.
Notable highlights of this wrestling game include Ted DiBiase's theme music being Girls in Cars, brought to you by Pile Driver, the album. Cause he sure did catch all those girls in cars with his Ted DiBiase plumber crack.
The good thing about the game is you're able to buy it if you want for $8. And that includes shipping. But we wouldn't recommend buying this game anyways. If you want to see everything this game can bring to you, watch this snippet of their commercial.
A leg drop, an elbow smash, a body slam!
They didn't show everything this game was able to do. Once again, look at that Hulk Hogan aging filter.
Please, don't. Let's just move on to the next video game. Now, I'm going to bring you this wonderful little gem, Pro Wrestling on the
Sega Master System! Well, now we're at least moving into a game that is functional.
Well, you can applaud Sega for stepping up their game after a mere 2 years of that disaster, Champion Pro Wrestling.
With massively increasing their roster from 2 wrestlers up to 4 tag teams, resulting in 8 unique wrestlers.
You mean like the Brony Soldiers?
What a brush! This game includes colorful sprites that are well animated and a fair audio design. This often bargain bin game card is the first game that we can actually recommend on this list that somebody pick up.
Why play this game when you could pick up the original game Goku Aku Domi Dump Matsumoto, released in 1986 for the Sega Mark III.
With its release in 1986, it was the first console wrestling game where we got to play as licensed wrestlers.
And not just licensed wrestlers, but the first female licensed wrestlers.
Being able to play as badasses such as Bull Nakano and Dump Matsumoto really helped make this game more enjoyable.
And nunchucks!
This is the first game we got to play where the wrestlers' larger-than-life personas actually translated over onto the television screen.
Fortunate for us, we were able to pick this game up at a way lower price than what we're seeing currently for sales of this game. So, we don't recommend purchasing this due to that massive increase in price.
But if you're looking for a cheap game at a bargain price, look no further than M-U-S-C-L-E, Muscle!
Muscle!
We're gonna go ahead and wrap these together and give you a twofer for our next game list, and that is Muscle and Kenny Kuman.
Basically because both games are essentially the same, other than a slight roster difference.
Where we gave the nod to Kenny Kuman because it more closely followed the anime adaptation.
And it gets you banned from YouTube.
If you know anything about us here at VGWA World, is that we absolutely adore Kenny Kuman, the wrestling video game.
For 99 cents, this game is just plain stupid fun.
So, for only 99 cents, go ahead, pick up this game, and spam some of your favorite moves, like a tomahawk chop, or a bulldogging headlock. because that will get you ready for the spam fest that is the next game on our list, Mat Mania.
Released in 1985 for the arcade and 2015 for the PS4 and 2019 on the Switch. Mat Mania is a fun but devilish arcade wrestling game that you will play for hours and hours because you just can't get farther than Coco Savage.
This game, being released in the arcades in the 80s, really gives it a heads up above all the other games on our list so far, with a roster of opponents featuring some of your favorite wrestlers from the 80s in knockoff form.
Because the Insane Warrior is better than the Brony Soldier.
Unfortunately, there's only two ways you can play this game. You can either spam the same shoulder block over and over again and win, or actually try to perform a wrestling move and lose.
Or you could spam your save state on the PS4 or the Switch. Wink. The downside about Mat Mania is you can't really play with other players.
But if you're like Wally and I, and you have no friends, for $8, this makes an excellent solo game that VGWA World recommends picking up. But even at $8, it pales in comparison to the bargain value of our next video game, UWC, with an estimated development in 1989, was never released for the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Thanks to Stefan Reese, who actually knew somebody who used to work at Nintendo, was able to get his hands on this game and introduce it to the world of fans who love wrestling video games.
Move over, WWF WrestleMania. During this time, both Wally and I repped WCW. In this video game, you get to play as one of my favorite wrestlers. And he is a man. He is the man called Sting.
Because we have an unfinished game, the game does suffer from a few flaws.
But even with its flaws, however, it comes in at our favorite price point of free. We can't recommend this video game enough.
When UWC production started, it was the placeholder for the future WCW video game that did turn into a localization of our next video game, Superstar Pro Wrestling, released for the Famicom.
My 80s games wish list. Road Warriors. Check. Vader. Check. Abdullah the Butcher. Check. They're all there.
But you missed Ricky Choshu and Ahmed Johnson, 2024.
Superstar Pro Wrestling provided the foundations of what could have been an excellent wrestling video game. But the computer was just so damn hard.
One highlight of the game is being able to select 4 moves out of 8 for the first example of wrestler customization.
And the ability to perform finishing maneuvers.
With the cheapest price point in this category, and featuring your favorite New Japan and All Japan Pro wrestlers, here at VGWA World, we recommend buying this game.
But some of my favorite finishing maneuvers were Scorpion Deathlocks, Ensiguris, Western Lariats, and Brainbusters. All which are present on the next game on our list, Tag Team Wrestling, for the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Released in 1986 on the Nintendo Entertainment System, Tag Team Wrestling became the theme song of VGWA World.
Unless somebody comes after us for money. Otherwise, it's totally different.
But you have to have money.
Tag Team Wrestling for the Nintendo Entertainment System was the first wrestling game that truly sunk its claws into me and got me in love with wrestling video games.
If you grew up in the 80s, you knew somebody who owned this game, and you went to their house and played it.
Often criticized for its controls of having to hit your opponent and then selecting your maneuver, I had no problem with this type of gameplay.
It's a unique way of button mashing in a video game. You develop muscle memory to hit the exact move you want to use on your opponent.
As another bargain game, VGWA World recommends that you go out and pick up this video game. Have fun playing competitive matches against a second player, or play against the computer, who will eventually whip your butt because they're going into beast mode.
Speaking of beast mode, it brings us to our next game, Champion Wrestler. Released in 1989 in the arcade and in 1990 on the PC Engine.
Before anybody cries foul, we're considering, much like Kenny Kuman and Muscle Tag Match, that these two games are pretty much the same game.
And if you're interested in a version of the game, I would go for the Nintendo Switch version. The arcade version is probably the best between the PC Engine and the Switch.
With some of the best graphics of a 1980s wrestling game that we have played so far, this game is easy to recommend because it is available digitally on various platforms.
With a unique button mashing system, this will be unlike any other wrestling video game you have played.
And unlike the arcade of Mat Mania, this arcade port has the ability for 2-player co-op and competitive play. And it's been scientifically proven that this game is 100 times better played in 2-player mode.
Because playing one player was hard, but not as hard as this next game, the Nintendo Hard Pro Wrestling, released in 1987.
One of the first wrestling video games to capture the essence of the wrestling match.
If you didn't have Tag Team, you had this game in your collection.
A game that is easy to recommend because you get it for free if you have a Nintendo Switch Online account.
I could go on and on about all the wrestlers in this game, but we all know Starman's the only one that counts.
In this wrestling video game, you can have fun playing against the computer as well as playing against a friend.
Utilizing a stamina system, you had to wear down your opponent to perform more powerful moves. One of my favorites within the game is to be able to win a belt and defend that belt, as well as you continue to gain up until you get to the top level, which I can't remember the name of the belts now.
Often regarded as a highly influential game, pro wrestling provided the backbone for many future wrestling video games.
Oh, you mean like our top pick, Fire Pro Wrestling Combination Tag?
Fire Pro Wrestling Combination Tag was released for the PC Engine in 1989. Whether you enjoy playing the Aki games on the N64, playing Fire Pro Wrestling World, or if you're currently playing AEW Fight Forever, the lineage for all these wrestling games can be attributed back to Fire Pro Combination Tag.
The core of the Fire Pro gameplay has held in place for decades, with only minor changes. That is a feat no other wrestling game can say it has done.
A game that was a blast to play in 1989 is just as fun to play now as it was back then. A true testament to any video game classic. With the wrestling mechanics based off a timing system, the only con that you may have with this video game is having to deal with lag introduced by non-CRT televisions.
If you didn't see this coming, the game being at a bargain price still, we are fully behind you purchasing this game and enjoying the best 1980s wrestling video game. So, what did you think of the list? Did you like our placements of the wrestling video games we played? Were there some hits or some misses? Leave us comments below on what you think were the top wrestling games or the worst wrestling games of the 80s.
And join us next time as we remaster Kinnikuman, released for the Famicom. And hopefully this time, we won't get in trouble with YouTube and have to remove our video.